Welcome to my channel. If you enjoy this story, don't forget to subscribe and like. The sky above Calyx 7 burned with streaks of violet and amber, a canvas of fire torn by the wreckage of starships raining molten debris. Ash fell like a widow's tears, cloaking a battlefield where humanity and the Syleth had clashed for a decade, turning a once lush colony world into a scarred wasteland. The ground was littered with shattered hulls and broken bodies, a testament to a war that had long since forgotten its purpose. Each crater told a story of rage, each ruin a monument to mutual destruction. Sergeant Ethan Cole trudged through the desolation of Outpost Theta, his combat suit patched with duct tape and scorched by plasma burns. His helmet's HUD flickered, its connection to the fleet's orbital relays severed hours ago after a Syleth barrage turned the sky to chaos. The air was thick with the stench of ozone and blood, human and alien mingling in a grim perfume. This was the rift, the Syleth called it, where human settlers had first staked their claim, where diplomacy had crumbled into slaughter. Now it was just a graveyard where hope went to die. Ethan's squad was gone, cut down in a dawn ambush that left him as the sole survivor. Their last orders echoed in his mind: reach the comms relay 4 kilometers north, re-establish contact with the fleet, and signal for extraction. It was a long shot, but Ethan was a soldier, and soldiers didn't quit. His boots crunched over fragments of ceramite and bone, his pulse rifle held low but ready, its power cell dangerously close to red. The rift had a way of making even the simplest missions a death sentence. He found her in the shadow of a collapsed watchtower, her Syleth form slumped against a jagged slab of durasteel. Her bioluminescent skin, once a shimmering teal, was dulled by dust and ichor, her delicate frame trembling with shallow breaths. A fractured energy lance lay beside her, its glow fading like her life. By all rights, Ethan should have ended her. One shot to the head, and one less enemy to haunt his dreams. His finger hovered over the trigger, the weight of 10 years of war pressing down. But her eyes stopped him. They weren't the cold, calculating slits of the Syleth warriors he'd fought. They glowed softly, violet and fierce, holding a defiance that mirrored his own stubborn will to survive. She didn't flinch, didn't plead. "Finish it, human," she whispered, her voice melodic yet strained, filtered through a translator woven into her armor. "Let the stars claim me." Ethan's grip wavered. There was something in her gaze, a spark of resilience that reminded him of his sister, lost in the war's early days, who'd fought until her last breath. He should have pulled the trigger. Instead, he slung his rifle and knelt beside her, his gloved hands probing the debris. "What's your name, Syleth?" he asked, his voice rough from dehydration and exhaustion. She blinked, her luminescent eyes narrowing with suspicion. "Lyrian," she said after a long pause, as if the word was a secret she wasn't sure she should share. "Why do you care, killer of my kin?" Ethan grunted, straining against the durasteel slab, his suit's servos whining as he shifted it just enough to free her. "Because I'm tired of killing," he muttered, more to himself than to her. Lyrian's body was a wreck. Her left arm hung useless, fractured at the elbow, and her side was gashed open, teal blood seeping through her cracked armor. She tried to stand, gasped in pain, and collapsed back against the rubble. Ethan didn't hesitate. He looped her good arm over his shoulder, ignoring the warning lights flashing across his HUD as his suit's power dipped to 20%. "There's a shelter network half a click west," he said, his tone clipped but firm. "Old mining tunnels. If you want to live, keep moving and keep quiet." Lyrian's eyes flickered with confusion, but she nodded, her weight heavy against him as they staggered through the ruins. The rift was a gauntlet of dangers. Syleth seeker drones hummed overhead, their violet beams sweeping for life signs. Human scavengers, deserters turned predators, roamed the shadows, ready to kill for a scrap of tech or a half-charged power cell. Ethan's HUD pinged with radiation warnings from a breached fusion core nearby, forcing them to detour through a maze of collapsed hab units. Lyrian stumbled often, her blood leaving a faint, glowing trail that would draw attention if they didn't move fast. Ethan tightened his grip, half carrying her as they pushed forward. "Why are you doing this?" Lyrian asked, her voice barely audible over the howl of the wind through shattered structures. Ethan kept his eyes on the horizon, scanning for threats. The question gnawed at him. Why was he risking everything for an enemy? His CO would call it treason. His squad, if they were still alive, would call him a fool. Yet here he was, dragging a Silith warrior through a war zone, defying every instinct drilled into him. Because, he said finally, pausing to check a corner, maybe there's a way out of this mess that doesn't end with us all dead. Lyrian didn't respond, but her silence felt heavy, like she was wrestling with the idea that a human could see her as anything other than a target. Ethan didn't care if she understood. He just needed to reach the shelter before the drones or scavengers found them. The entrance was hidden beneath a pile of rusted machinery, its blast doors sealed but intact. Ethan pried them open with a scavenged pry bar, his suit's servos straining as the metal groaned. Inside, the tunnels were a relic of the colony's early days, their walls lined with flickering lights and the faint hum of geothermal power. Deep within, Ethan found a med bay, its autodock still functional despite decades of neglect. He helped Lyrian onto the table, her protests weak as the machine's scanners hummed to life. "This is pointless," she murmured, her voice tight with pain. "You should be saving your own." Ethan ignored her, his fingers moving over the autodock's controls, programming it to stabilize her wounds. The machine injected nanites, sealed her gashes with synthetic tissue, and administered painkillers. Lyrian watched him, her violet eyes studying his every move. "You're not what I expected," she said softly. "Humans are supposed to be merciless." Ethan snorted, checking his rifle's charge, down to 30%. "You've been listening to your own propaganda." But her words hit closer to home than he cared to admit. He'd seen humans do things in this war that made him question what they were fighting for: massacres, orbital strikes on civilian zones, entire cities reduced to ash. He shook the thought away, focusing on the task at hand. The autodock beeped, signaling Lyrian was stable, though her arm would need time to heal. The tunnels shook, a low rumble vibrating through the walls as another Silith barrage hit the surface. Dust sifted from the ceiling, coating Ethan's visor. His HUD warned of critical power levels, the suit's systems struggling to keep up. He turned to Lyrian, who was testing her arm, wincing but sitting up. "Stay put," he ordered. "You're not out of the woods yet." She glared at him, her defiance returning. "I don't take orders from humans," she said, but there was less venom in her tone, replaced by something like curiosity. The shelter's comms unit crackled, spitting static and fragments of a human distress call. Ethan lunged for it, his heart racing as he adjusted the frequency. The voice was faint, laced with panic. "Outpost data overwhelmed, need evac." The signal cut out, replaced by a Silith transmission, cold and melodic. "Human resistance will be purged. Surrender or be erased." Ethan slammed his fist against the console, the impact echoing in the small room. The sound was a release, a way to push back the fear and rage threatening to overwhelm him. "Your people don't give up," Lyrian said, her voice carrying a trace of admiration. "Neither do yours," Ethan shot back, his tone sharp. He checked his suit's diagnostics. 18% power, barely enough to keep moving. The comms relay was their only hope, but reaching it meant crossing open ground patrolled by drones and scavengers who'd kill for a single power cell. He glanced at Lyrian, who was standing now, her energy lance dim but gripped tightly. "You're not coming," he said. "You'll slow me down." "I'm not staying," Lyrian replied, her voice firm despite her injuries. "If you're walking into death, I owe you enough to face it with you." Ethan stared at her, torn between distrust and a flicker of respect. He didn't trust her, not completely, but he wasn't alone anymore, and that was something. "Fine," he said. "But if you turn on me, I'll end you before they do." Lyrian's lips curved, a faint, almost human smile. "Agreed." They left the shelter at twilight, the violet sky fading to a deep indigo. The terrain was a labyrinth of craters and wreckage, each step a gamble against hidden mines or collapsing ruins. Ethan took point, his HUD scanning for threats while Lyrian followed, her lance humming softly. The air buzzed with the whine of drones, their violet beams cutting through the dusk. Ethan motioned for Lyrian to take cover behind a shattered dropship, his pulse pounding as the drone passed overhead, its sensors missing them by inches. The drone moved on, but the danger lingered. Ethan's HUD pinged, movement 150 meters east. Human scavengers, their heat signatures erratic, likely hopped up on stolen stims. He signaled Lyrian to stay low, but she was already moving, her lance deactivated to avoid detection. "They're not your allies," she whispered, her voice low and urgent. "They'll kill us both." Ethan nodded, his jaw tight. The scavengers were as much a threat as the Scythe, driven by desperation and greed. The scavengers closed in, their voices carrying through the ruins, rough, eager, planning to strip the battlefield bare. Ethan and Lyrian had moments to decide, fight or hide. Hiding was safer, but the relay was too close to delay. Ethan made the call. "We hit them hard," he whispered. "Take out their leader, break their nerve." Lyrian nodded, her lance flaring to life with a soft glow. For a moment, they were not enemies, but soldiers united by necessity. The fight was quick and brutal. Ethan's rifle spat precise bursts, dropping the scavenger leader before he could draw. Lyrian moved like liquid light, her lance slicing through armor with eerie grace. The scavengers scattered, fleeing into the shadows, but not before one landed a shot that grazed Ethan's thigh, the plasma burning through his suit. He grunted, clamping a hand over the wound as Lyrian pulled him behind cover, the pain sharp but bearable. She tore a strip of her own armor's fabric, binding his wound with surprising care. "You're hurt," she said, her voice tight with concern. "It's nothing," Ethan lied, the pain flaring with every step. He sprayed med foam over the wound, dulling the burn. Lyrian watched him, her eyes unreadable. "You're as stubborn as your kind's reputation," she said. Ethan grinned, a spark of defiance in his eyes. "You're catching on." They pushed forward, the relay now visible, its skeletal antenna rising against the darkening sky. The relay was a relic, half-ruined but operational, its consoles flickering with faint power. Crossing the open ground to reach it was a death trap. Scythe drones patrolled the perimeter, and Ethan's HUD flag buried mines and a cloaked sniper's energy signature. "This is madness," Lyrian said, scanning the field. "Got a better plan?" Ethan asked, his voice dry. She didn't. They moved fast, using wrecked vehicles for cover. Ethan's suit was down to 12% power, its systems faltering. Lyrian matched his pace, her lance ready despite her injuries. Halfway across, the sniper fired. A plasma bolt scorched the ground beside Ethan, forcing him to dive behind a tank husk. Lyrian followed, another shot vaporizing a chunk of metal above them. "Stay down!" Ethan hissed, his HUD pinpointing the sniper's perch on the relay's lower platform. His rifle's charge was too low for a sustained fight. Lyrian, however, was already moving, her lance glowing as she sprinted toward the platform. "Cover me!" she called, weaving through the sniper's fire. Ethan cursed, firing what little his rifle had left to draw attention. Seconds later, a cry echoed through the ruins, followed by silence. Lyrian emerged, her lance dripping teal blood, the sniper's cloak deactivated to reveal a lifeless form. "Clear!" she called, her voice steady but strained. Ethan joined her, his thigh throbbing but his focus sharp. Inside the relay, the console hummed faintly. Ethan plugged in his suit's data core, praying it would work. The screens flickered, pulling fragments of fleet chatter. "Calyx 7, critical losses, need support." The signal was weak, but it was enough. Ethan transmitted his coordinates, his hands trembling with exhaustion. Lyrian stood guard, her lance casting a soft glow in the darkness. "Your fleet's gone," she said quietly. "They're fighting a losing battle." Ethan didn't look at her, his focus on the console. "Then we give them a reason to keep going." The console pinged, a faint acknowledgement from the fleet, a lifeline in a dying world. The ground shook, a deep rumble signaling approaching Scythe tanks. Ethan's HUD screamed warnings, heavy armor, closing fast. They've tracked us, Lyrian said, her voice grim. Ethan yanked his data core free. The relay was live, but they had minutes before the tanks turned it to slag. We move, he said, grabbing her arm. Now. They fled as the first shells hit, the relay collapsing in a blaze of fire and dust. Ethan's suit was at 8% power, his vision blurring as the med foam struggled to keep his wounds stable. Lyrian half-carried him, her own strength waning but her resolve unbroken. They stumbled into a ravine, its walls shielding them from the worst of the blast. Ethan slumped against the rock, his rifle useless, its charge gone. Lyrian crouched beside him, her lance dim but ready. This is the end, she said, her voice calm but heavy. You should have left me. Ethan shook his head, a faint smile breaking through the pain. And missed this party? He checked his HUD one last time, clinging to the faint fleet signal. The tanks stopped, their engines idling as drones swept the ravine. Ethan and Lyrian pressed against the rock, their breaths shallow, their fates bound. If we die, Ethan whispered, his voice steady despite the odds, we die together. Lyrian met his gaze, her violet eyes reflecting the same fire he'd seen in the ruins. Then we make it worth it, she said, raising her lance. The drones closed in, their beams locking onto them, and Ethan braced for the fight of his life. The ravine's walls trembled as the Scythe tanks roared closer, their plasma cannons carving molten scars into the night. Ethan Cole crouched low, his combat suit's power cells blinking a desperate 6%, the med foam on his thigh wound barely holding. Beside him, Lyrian gripped her energy lance, its faint teal glow a beacon in the dark. The drone's violet beams swept the ravine, their sensors locking onto the heat signatures of two unlikely allies, a human sergeant and a Scythe warrior, bound by a choice neither fully understood. The air was thick with the promise of death, but Ethan's mind clung to the faint fleet signal pulsing in his HUD, a fragile thread of hope in a world drowning in ash. Ethan's breath was shallow, his vision swimming from blood loss and exhaustion. We can't outrun them, he whispered, his voice hoarse but steady. Lyrian's violet eyes flicked to him, her bioluminescent skin pulsing faintly with her heartbeat. Then we fight, she said, her tone carrying the weight of a warrior who'd seen too many battles end in blood. Ethan managed a grim smile. You're starting to sound like one of us. The drones were closing in, their hum a relentless chorus. Ethan scanned the ravine, his soldiers' instincts kicking in despite the odds. The walls were steep but pitted with crevices, potential cover, if they could move fast enough. There, he said, nodding toward a narrow fissure 20 meters up the slope. If we can get inside, we might lose them. Lyrian followed his gaze, her expression skeptical but resolute. Lead on, human! They scrambled up the rocky incline, Ethan's wounded leg screaming with every step. Lyrian moved with a grace that belied her injuries, her lance ready to deflect any sudden strike. The drone's beams grazed the rocks above them, sending shards of stone raining down. Ethan shoved Lyrian into the fissure just as a plasma bolt scorched the ground where they'd stood, the heat singeing his suit. They pressed deeper into the crevice, the walls closing in until they were shoulder to shoulder, their breaths mingling in the damp, metallic air. The drones hovered outside, their sensors probing but unable to penetrate the dense rock. Ethan's HUD flickered, its power too low to maintain a full scan, but the absence of immediate fire was a small mercy. Lyrian leaned against the wall, her lance dimming to conserve energy. They'll wait us out, she said, her voice low. Scythe drones are patient. Unlike your kind. Ethan snorted, wiping sweat from his brow. Patience gets you killed when tanks are rolling in. We need a way out. He studied the fissure, its walls glistening with mineral deposits that caught the faint glow of Lyrian's skin. The crevice extended deeper, branching into a tunnel that smelled of rust and decay. Old mining network, Ethan said, recognizing the signs from his early days on Calyx 7, when he'd guarded prospectors before the war turned everything to ash. If we're lucky, it connects to the shelter grid. Lyrian raised an eyebrow, her translator catching the human idiom. Luck? Your species relies on such a fragile thing. Ethan grinned, a spark of defiance in his eyes. Fragile's all we've got sometimes. He took point, his rifle useless but held out of habit, its weight a comfort despite its empty charge. Lyrian followed, her lance casting just enough light to navigate the twisting tunnels. The air grew colder, the walls narrowing until they had to move single file. Ethan's HUD pinged a faint geothermal signature ahead, a power source, maybe, or a trap. He signaled Lyrian to slow, his instincts screaming caution. The tunnel opened into a cavern, its ceiling studded with stalactites that gleamed like frozen tears. At its center stood a derelict mining rig, its solar panels long shattered but its core still humming with residual power. Ethan's HUD spiked, detecting a faint signal, not Silith, not human, but something older, a colonial distress beacon embedded in the rig. This is pre-war tech, he said, kneeling beside the machine. If we can boost its signal, we might get a message to the fleet. Lyrian's eyes narrowed, her lance raised defensively. Or alert every Silith patrol in the sector. Ethan didn't argue. She was right, the risk was high, but so was the reward. He pried open the rig's access panel, his gloved hands fumbling with rusted wiring. You got a better idea? He asked, his voice tight with concentration. Lyrian didn't respond, but she moved to cover the cavern's entrance, her lance glowing brighter as she scanned for threats. The rig's console flickered to life, its screen cracked but functional. Ethan patched his suit's data core into it, praying the ancient system would hold. The beacon's signal was weak, barely reaching beyond the cavern, but it was a start. He began encoding a message, outpost data fallen. Sole survivor. Request immediate evac. Coordinates attached. His fingers hesitated over the transmit key. If I send this, he said, glancing at Lyrian, it could bring your people down on us. Lyrian met his gaze, her expression unreadable. And if you don't, your fleet will never know you're alive. Ethan nodded, a flicker of respect passing between them. He hit the key, the beacon pulsing as the signal shot upward, a desperate cry into the void. For a moment, the cavern was silent, the only sound the hum of the rig, and the distant drip of water. Then the ground shook, a deep rumble that sent stalactites crashing to the floor. They found us, Lyrian said, her voice calm but edged with urgency. Ethan yanked his data core free, his HUD screaming warnings of incoming Silith signatures, tanks, drones, and something heavier, a walker unit by the seismic readings. Move! He shouted, grabbing Lyrian's arm as they sprinted back into the tunnels. The cavern collapsed behind them, the rig's signal dying in a roar of dust and stone. Ethan's suit was down to 4%, its systems failing one by one. Lyrian's lance flickered, her own strength waning as her wounds took their toll. The tunnels branched chaotically, a labyrinth carved by desperate miners long before the war. Ethan's HUD was useless now, its map functioned offline, but his instincts guided them deeper, away from the surface. Lyrian stumbled, her breath ragged, and Ethan caught her, his own leg burning with every step. Keep going, he said, his voice firm despite the pain. We're not dying in here. Lyrian's eyes glowed faintly, a mix of defiance and exhaustion. You're too loud, human, she muttered, but she pushed forward, leaning on him as much as he leaned on her. They emerged into a larger chamber, its walls lined with ancient cryonics, colonial tech, designed to preserve miners during emergencies. Most were dark, their occupants long dead, but one glowed faintly, its status lights blinking green. Ethan approached, his heart pounding. Survivors, he whispered, checking the unit's display. It held a single occupant, a human engineer, frozen since the war's early days. The nameplate read, Dr. Elena Voss. Ethan froze, his breath catching. Voss, his sister's surname, though she died years ago in a Silith raid. Or so he'd thought. It's not possible, he said, his voice barely audible. Lyrian glanced at him, sensing the shift in his demeanor. Who is she? She asked, her tone softer now, almost gentle. Ethan didn't answer, his hands trembling as he input the revival sequence. The cryonet hummed, its systems cycling through warm-up protocols. If she's alive, he said finally. She might know something, tech codes, anything to get us out of this. Lyrian nodded, but her eyes were on the tunnel entrance, where the hum of drones was growing louder. The cryonet hissed, venting preservation mist as the hatch opened. Elena Voss stirred, her eyes snapping open with a soldier's instincts, though she was no soldier. She was older than Ethan remembered, her hair streaked with gray, but her face was unmistakable. Ethan? She croaked, her voice cracked from years in stasis. He knelt beside her, his heart caught between relief and disbelief. It's me, Elena. You're safe. But the lie tasted bitter. They weren't safe, not here, not now. Lyrian's lance flared as drones entered the chamber, their beams locking onto the trio. Get her up! Lyrian shouted, diving behind a cryonet as plasma bolts scorched the air. Ethan hauled Elena to her feet, her legs unsteady but her mind sharp. What the hell's going on? She demanded, her engineer's brain already analyzing the situation. War, Ethan said, dragging her toward cover. Same as always. Lyrian fought like a storm, her lance carving through drones with precision, but there were too many. Ethan's rifle was dead, but he grabbed a jagged piece of metal, using it as a crude club to smash a drone that got too close. Elena, despite her disorientation, scavenged a power cell from a dead cryonet, her hands moving with practiced efficiency. If we can overload the geothermal tap, she said, her voice steady, we might take out the drones and buy time. Ethan nodded, trusting her instincts. Do it. They moved as a unit, Lyrian covering their flank while Elena rigged the tap, her fingers flying over exposed wiring. Ethan guarded the entrance, his makeshift weapons slick with drone oil. The tap sparked, its hum rising to a scream as Elena pushed it past its limits. Get down! She yelled. The explosion rocked the chamber, frying the drones in a wave of electromagnetic static. The trio ducked behind a cryonet, the blast's heat singeing their skin. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the drip of water and the faint hum of surviving cryonets. Ethan helped Elena up, his eyes scanning her for injuries. You always were a pain in the ass, he said, a grin breaking through his exhaustion. Elena smirked, but her expression darkened as she noticed Lyrian. Why's a Silith with you? She asked, her voice sharp with suspicion. Ethan hesitated, glancing at Lyrian, who stood silently, her lance dim but ready. She saved my life, he said finally. And I saved hers. We're in this together. Elena's eyes narrowed, but she didn't argue. The war had taught her to trust Ethan's judgment, even when it defied reason. Lyrian met Elena's gaze, her own expression unyielding. Your brother is a fool, she said, but a brave one. Elena snorted. That's Ethan. The chamber shook again, this time from something heavier, tanks, their seismic signatures unmistakable. We can't stay, Ethan said, checking his HUD. It was offline, but the faint fleet signal still lingered in his memory, a beacon pulling him forward. The comms relay's gone, but there's a secondary outpost 2 clicks north. If we can reach it, we might still get a signal out. Elena nodded, already scavenging tools from the cryonets. I can boost the signal if we find a working console, she said. But we'll need power. Lyrian pointed to the surviving cryonets. Their cells are still active. We can use them. Ethan nodded, impressed by her quick thinking. They worked fast, Elena and Lyrian stripping power cells while Ethan stood guard, his makeshift club ready. The tanks were close now, their cannons audible even through the rock. We move now or we're dead, Ethan said, helping Elena carry the cells. Lyrian led the way, her lance lighting the tunnel as they fled deeper into the network. The tunnels were a maze, their walls scarred by decades of neglect. Ethan's leg burned, but he pushed through, driven by the need to protect Elena and the fragile alliance with Lyrian. The Silith warrior moved with purpose, her injuries slowing her but not stopping her. Elena, despite her years in stasis, kept pace, her engineer's mind cataloging every detail of the tunnels. This network connects to the outpost, she said, her voice steady. I worked these mines before the war. I know the way. They emerged into a larger chamber. Its ceiling collapsed to reveal a sliver of the violet sky. The outpost was visible in the distance, its comms array a faint silhouette against the horizon. But the ground between was a kill zone, crawling with Scythe patrols and human scavengers. Ethan's HUD was dead, but his instincts screamed danger. "We can't cross open ground," he said. "Not with tanks on our tail." Lyrian scanned the area, her eyes narrowing. "There's an underground mag rail. If it's still intact, it could get us close." The mag rail was a gamble, its tracks rusted and its power long gone. But Elena's scavenged cells gave them a chance. They descended into the rail tunnel, the air thick with dust and the scent of decay. Elena rigged the cells to the rail's control panel, her hands steady despite the distant rumble of tanks. "This'll either work or blow us to hell," she said, flipping the switch. The rail car lurched to life, its engines sputtering but holding. They climbed aboard, the car rattling through the dark as the tank's cannons echoed above. The journey was tense, the car's groans mingling with the distant sounds of war. Ethan sat beside Lyrian, his club across his lap, his eyes on the tunnel ahead. "Why'd you save me?" he asked, his voice low. Lyrian didn't look at him, her gaze fixed on the darkness. "Because I saw something in you," she said finally. "Something my people have forgotten, hope." Ethan didn't respond, but her words settled into him, a spark in the cold. The rail car shuddered to a stop, its power spent. They were close to the outpost, but the surface was alive with threats. Ethan helped Elena out, her scavenged tools slung over her shoulder. Lyrian took point, her lance ready. "We're not done yet," Ethan said, his voice firm. "We get to that outpost, we get that signal out, and we show them this war doesn't have to end in ashes." Lyrian met his gaze, her eyes glowing with a fire that matched his own. "Together," she said, and they stepped into the unknown, their fates bound by a choice to fight for something more. The mag rail tunnel spat them out into a world of fire and ruin. The outpost loomed ahead, its comms array a jagged silhouette against the violet inferno of Calyx 7's sky. Ethan Cole limped forward, his combat suit dead, its power cells drained to nothing. The med foam on his thigh wound was failing, blood seeping through the cracks, but his grip on the scavenged metal club was steady. Beside him, Lyrian moved with a predator's grace, her energy lance flickering but still deadly, her bioluminescent skin pulsing faintly with each labored breath. Elena Voss, Ethan's sister, followed close, clutching a satchel of scavenged power cells and tools, her engineer's mind racing despite the years she'd spent in cryosleep. Above, the war raged on. Scythe tanks roared across the wasteland, their plasma cannons painting the horizon with molten scars, while human scavengers and drones circled like vultures. The trio was a fragile alliance, bound by a desperate hope to end a war that had consumed everything they knew. The outpost was less than a kilometer away, but the open ground between was a killing field. Ethan's eyes scanned the terrain, picking out the glint of Scythe drones and the erratic movements of human scavengers. "We can't go straight," he said, his voice rough with exhaustion. "Too exposed." Lyrian nodded, her violet eyes narrowing as she studied the ruins. "There's a drainage culvert to the east," she said. "It runs under the battlefield. If it's still intact, it could get us close." Elena adjusted her satchel, her face set with determination. "I can boost the outpost signal if we reach the console. But we'll need time." Ethan met Lyrian's gaze, a silent agreement passing between them. Time was a luxury they didn't have, but they'd fight for every second. They moved toward the culvert, crouching low to avoid detection. The air was thick with ash and the acrid tang of burning metal, the ground trembling with each distant explosion. Ethan's leg burned with every step, but he pushed through, driven by the need to protect Elena and the fragile trust he'd built with Lyrian. The Scythe warrior moved like a shadow, her lance ready, her wounds slowing her but not stopping her. Elena kept pace, her tools clinking softly, her eyes darting to every shadow as if expecting betrayal. The culvert was half collapsed, its entrance choked with debris. Ethan cleared a path with his club, his muscles screaming as he shoved aside rusted beams. Lyrian helped, her lance cutting through metal with precision, while Elena rigged a scavenged power cell to light their way. Inside, the culvert was a claustrophobic tunnel, its walls slick with algae and the stench of stagnation. Water sloshed around their knees, glowing faintly with bioluminescent microbes, a remnant of Calyx 7's lost ecosystem. "This place gives me the creeps," Elena muttered, her voice echoing in the dark. Ethan managed a faint grin. "You've been asleep for a decade. Everything's creepy now." Lyrian's lance cast eerie shadows, her expression unreadable. "Your world was beautiful once," she said, her voice soft but heavy. "We ruined it together." Ethan didn't respond, but her words hit hard. He'd seen the old colony vids, lush forests, sparkling rivers, a planet full of promise. Now it was ash and bone, a casualty of a war either side could win. He pushed the thought aside, focusing on the tunnel ahead. The outpost was close, but so were their pursuers. Halfway through the culvert, the water erupted in a spray of light and heat. Silith drones had found them, their beams slicing through the darkness. Ethan shoved Elena behind him, swinging his club to smash one drone into the wall. Lyrian moved like liquid fire, her lance carving through two more, but the tunnel was too narrow for a prolonged fight. "Run!" Ethan shouted, dragging Elena toward the exit as Lyrian covered their retreat. A drone's beam grazed her shoulder, searing through her armor, and she hissed in pain but didn't falter, her lance flashing with defiance. They burst out of the culvert into a shattered plaza, the outpost's walls looming just 100 meters away. But the battlefield was alive with chaos. Silith tanks rolled in from the west, their turrets sweeping for targets, while human scavengers clashed with a Silith patrol in a brutal melee. Ethan's heart sank. They were caught in a crossfire, with nowhere to hide. "We need a diversion," he said, his mind racing. Lyrian's eyes met his, a spark of understanding passing between them. "I can draw the tanks," she said. "You get to the console." Ethan grabbed her arm, his grip tight. "Not a chance. We do this together." Lyrian's lips curved, a faint smile that carried centuries of war weariness. "You're still too loud, human." But she stayed, her lance ready as they sprinted toward the outpost. Elena led the way, her engineer's instincts guiding them through the ruins. A scavenger's bullet clipped Ethan's shoulder, the pain sharp but distant, drowned out by adrenaline. He swung his club, dropping the attacker, while Lyrian's lance took out another. They reached the outpost's gate, its blast doors half open and riddled with plasma burns. Inside, the comms room was a wreck, consoles sparking, screens cracked, but the main array was intact. Elena dove for it, her hands flying over the controls as she patched in the scavenged power cells. "I need 5 minutes," she said, her voice steady despite the chaos outside. Ethan and Lyrian took positions at the door, their backs to the wall as the sounds of battle grew closer. "We'll give you 10, Ethan said, his voice firm but laced with doubt. Lyrian's lance hummed, her eyes scanning the plaza. "Your sister's brave," she said, her tone almost wistful. "Like you?" Ethan snorted, his club raised. "She's the smart one. I'm just the idiot who keeps swinging." Lyrian's smile widened, but it faded as a Silith tank roared into view, its cannon locking onto the outpost. "Down!" she shouted, tackling Ethan as a plasma bolt vaporized the wall above them. Debris rained down, and Ethan's vision swam, his wounds catching up with him. Elena's voice cut through the chaos. "Signal's live! I've got a lock on the fleet." Ethan crawled to her side, his heart pounding. The console screen flickered, displaying a weak but steady connection to the human fleet. He typed a message, his fingers trembling. "Outpost Theta survivor. Silith assault imminent. Request immediate support. Coordinates attached." He hit transmit, the signal shooting into the void. For a moment, hope flickered, a chance that someone, somewhere, was listening. But the tanks were closing in, their cannons tearing through the outpost's walls. Lyrian dragged Ethan to his feet, her lance dim but still active. "We need to move," she said, her voice urgent. Elena yanked her tools free, the console still humming. "The signal's looping," she said. "If the fleet's out there, they'll hear it." Ethan nodded, but his eyes were on the plaza, where a new threat emerged, a Scythe commander, her armor gleaming with authority, flanked by elite guards. Her eyes locked onto Lyrian, and Ethan felt the air shift, heavy with recognition. "Lyrian of the Third Crest," the commander called, her voice cold through her translator. "You betray your kin for humans?" Lyrian stepped forward, her lance raised, her expression unyielding. "I betray no one, Solara. I fight for a future you've forgotten." Ethan's heart sank. This was personal. Lyrian knew her, and that made things complicated. He tightened his grip on his club, stepping beside her. "You're not alone," he whispered. Lyrian's eyes flicked to him, a flicker of gratitude in their violet depths. The commander, Solara, raised her hand, and her guards opened fire. Ethan and Lyrian dove behind a console, plasma bolts scorching the air. Elena scrambled to a nearby terminal, her hands working to overload the outpost's defenses, a desperate bid to buy time. Ethan swung his club, deflecting a guard's blade, while Lyrian's lance carved through another. But Solara was relentless, her own lance a blur of teal light as she advanced on Lyrian. "You disgrace us," she hissed, her blade clashing with Lyrian's in a shower of sparks. Ethan tackled a guard, his club smashing through its helmet, but a second guard's blade caught his side, slicing through his suit. He grunted, blood pooling as he staggered back. Lyrian saw him fall, her eyes flashing with fury. She parried Solara's strike, her lance moving with desperate precision, and drove her blade into the commander's shoulder. Solara screamed, stumbling back, but her guards closed in, overwhelming Lyrian with sheer numbers. Elena's voice rang out. "Defenses online!" The outpost's automated turrets roared to life, spraying plasma at the Scythe guards. The attack gave Lyrian a moment to break free, dragging Ethan behind cover. "You're bleeding out," she said, her voice tight with worry. Ethan grinned weakly, his vision blurring. "Not the first time." Elena joined them, her hands shaking as she applied med foam to Ethan's wound. "Stay with me, you idiot," she muttered, her eyes wet with tears. The turrets bought them time, but the tanks were still coming, their cannons reducing the outpost to rubble. Lyrian's lance was nearly spent, her wounds slowing her down. Ethan forced himself to his feet, his club heavy in his hands. "We need to end this," he said, his voice barely audible. Lyrian nodded, her eyes meeting his. "There's one way," she said. "The commander's flagship, it's in low orbit, coordinating the assault. If we can disable it, the fleet might hesitate." Ethan's heart sank. A flagship was a fortress, and reaching it was suicide. But the fleet signal was still looping, and he clung to the hope that someone was listening. "How do we get up there?" he asked. Elena pointed to a wrecked shuttle in the plaza, half buried but intact. "If I can get it running, it might have enough juice for a one-way trip." Ethan nodded, his resolve hardening. "Then we go." They fought their way to the shuttle, Lyrian's lance and the outpost turrets covering their retreat. Elena worked frantically, rigging the scavenged power cells to the shuttle's engines. Solara's guards pursued, their plasma bolts tearing through the ruins. Ethan took a hit to the chest, the impact knocking him to the ground. Lyrian dragged him aboard, her own wounds bleeding freely now. "Don't you dare die," she growled, her voice fierce but trembling. Ethan managed a weak smile. "You're not rid of me yet." The shuttle's engines roared, lifting off as the outposts collapsed behind them. Elena piloted, her hands steady despite the chaos. The craft shook, its hull barely holding as Scythe drones pursued. Lyrian manned the shuttle's lone turret, her shots precise despite her fading strength. Ethan strapped into a seat, his vision darkening, but he forced himself to stay conscious. The flagship loomed ahead, a massive orb of gleaming metal, its weapons arrays lighting the sky. They breached the flagship's hangar, the shuttle crashing in a spray of sparks. Ethan staggered out, his club raised, while Lyrian's lance flared one last time. Elena carried the power cells, her eyes scanning for a control room. The hangar was a maze of Silith tech, guarded by drones and elite warriors. Ethan and Lyrian fought as one, his club smashing through armor while her lance carved through flesh. Elena found a terminal, her hands flying over the controls. "I can overload the flagship's core," she said. "But it'll take everything we've got." Ethan nodded, his breath ragged. "Do it." Lyrian met his gaze, her eyes fierce. "This ends the war," she said. "Or it ends us." They fought their way to the core, Ethan's strength failing, Lyrian's lance dimming. Elena rigged the power cells, the core's hum rising to a scream. Solara appeared, her wounds bandaged but her fury undimmed. "You'll destroy us all!" she roared, her lance aimed at Lyrian. Ethan threw himself between them, his club deflecting Solara's strike. Lyrian countered, her blade piercing Solara's chest. The commander fell, her eyes wide with shock. The core's alarms blared, and Elena shouted, "It's done! We need to go!" But there was no way back. The shuttle was wreckage, and the flagship was seconds from detonation. Ethan grabbed Lyrian's hand, his voice steady despite the pain. "We did it! That's enough!" Lyrian squeezed his hand, her eyes glowing with a quiet acceptance. "Together," she said. The core exploded, a wave of light and heat consuming the flagship. The blast rippled through the Silith fleet, disabling their coordination. On the surface, the tanks faltered, their drones falling silent. The human fleet, battered but alive, received Ethan's signal and launched a counterattack, seizing the moment. Days later, peace talks began on a neutral moon. Human and Silith delegates sat together, wary but willing, the memory of the flagship's destruction a stark reminder of the cost of war. In a quiet corner of Calyx 7, a new settlement rose from the ashes, human and Silith engineers working side by side. Children played in the ruins, their laughter a fragile promise of a future unmarred by hate. In the heart of the old mining tunnels, a single cryonet was sealed, containing Ethan's battered suit and Lyrian's lance, their scars a testament to their sacrifice. A plaque read, "For those who chose hope over war." The war was over, not because one side won, but because two souls dared to believe in something better. And in their choice, Calyx 7 found a dawn worth fighting for.